Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. You're watching the News Night and I'm Deepthi Sachdeva. After days of fire, fury and ferocity, Netanyahu has decided to hit the pause button. But not before you have Tehran that has been struck hard. Does this mean that there were cracks possibly in Israel's defense? We do not know. Was there humiliation? Again, that is a question. Trump did not take this lightly. In a rare rebuke that has never happened, he's lashed out, perhaps his very first time against Israel. And he says you must not drop the bombs. Now with a sudden ceasefire, Trump has declared peace and positions himself as the new king, quote unquote, the king of the Middle East, nuclear or not. Iran is emboldened. Israel, for the moment, looks shaken. What is the US message? For the moment, it's a little blurry, difficult to read through it. And in the shadows, you have Russia that is watching and smiling. Let's get you breaking updates on a story that is still developing fast. You have shots of celebration that have come in earlier from Tehran, and that's our first breaking update here on the show. These are people who've taken to the streets. Look at those images there right now coming in, because Iran says that we have won this war. How exactly, no one knows, but you've seen some very, very sharp responses coming in, and this is an image and a video of the Iranians who've gathered earlier to celebrate victory, victory against Israel. Israel and Iran, you have seen them fighting for the longest time, sworn enemies, and today you have such images coming in from Iran versus an Israel that is more calculated and watchful about what has happened. Let's bring out a second breaking update also as the story is moving fast, and this is a response earlier that has come in from Donald Trump. Could there be a regime change in Iran? Where is the supreme leader? What about the nukes? Donald Trump answering all those questions.
No, if there was, there was. But no, I don't want it. I'd like to see everything calm down as quickly as possible.
President, did Iran make any commitments yesterday about uranium enrichment?
About what?
About uranium enrichment.
They're not going to have enrichment, and they're not going to have a nuclear weapon, and they know that. They're going to get on to being a great trading nation. You know, they're very good traders.
All right, so this is important because Trump says for the moment, not looking at a regime change. But then he was also asked a question on nukes, and he has said that Iran cannot develop nukes. But then as we were coming into the studio, remember there are reports that the Iranian nuclear agency has said that our program to develop nukes is going to continue unabated. So what happens to all this? What happens to all these sharp talks that you're looking at coming in from Donald Trump? The story has also seen significant developments, dramatic images through the day. Let's bring up top 5 war updates. Is there a war? For the moment, maybe no. The conflict looks like there is some bit of a de-escalation there. But what has happened today? Let's bring up those details first up for you. You have seen a late night announcement of that truce that has come in from Donald Trump. How did that happen? Who all did he speak to? Why did he announce this now? I'm going to tell you about that in just a moment. This brings us to a second important detail again that's going to go up on your screen, something that has happened earlier today. Look at these images right now, and images of utter devastation. This is when Iran struck Beersheba. 4 people have lost their lives. And all this is happening after Donald Trump had announced that ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Let's bring our third important war update on what has happened today, and we'll continue to get more images to you. The man that you see on your screens, Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that if Iran continues to do what it is, we will still continue our powerful strikes against Iran. But for the moment, there is silence, because he says if Iran does not respond, we are okay. At the moment, not getting into any escalation. Let's bring up the next update also for you as far as the story goes. Now, there were reports that came in earlier that Israel has retaliated for the Beersheba attack that we just showed you more images of, where 4 people lost their lives. And this again is a satellite imagery that talks more about the kind of impact. So Donald Trump announces a ceasefire. In spite of that, you have Iran that continues retaliation, and Israel also struck back. Let's get you the other important update as far as the story is concerned, and we'll also get you perspective. We are also talking about where is the supreme leader? Where is he right now? An angry Trump. It was a very, very angry Donald Trump who has warned both Israel and Iran, and Israel for the very first time Why has he done this? What does this entail? What were the conditions for the ceasefire? All these things, remember, are important details. And you would recall it is the same Donald Trump who, remember, had spoken about him wanting to have this ceasefire between Pakistan and India. And he said, I mediated this. That bluff has been called out multiple times. So is Trump lying? Even when he speaks about the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, or there is more to this story. Let's now also tell you the inside story of this entire ceasefire. How did this thing move? What happened in the last few hours? The first detail is here on your screens. What we can tell you now is that Trump personally dialed Netanyahu and top Iranian officials. When he realized that you need to do something, he got the phone lines working. Now, the Vice President J.D. Vance and also Marco Rubio spoke directly to Iran's leadership. Who in the Iranian leadership? Is it actually Ayatollah or is it someone else? That is still not clear. But what is very clear from the White House is that there was a communication with the top Iranian leadership. Qatar has been a key US ally that has helped broker this entire back channel. We remember those images that came in from Qatar late last night of the airbase of the US that actually came under attack. And you had seen Qatar saying that any kind of escalation will be responded to. But then Qatar got into this entire mediation. The next important detail, Iran's condition has been very clear. They said a ceasefire only if Israel stops first. So it was a question about who blinks first. And Donald Trump, without speaking to both sides, actually suddenly also spoke of that ceasefire. The White House then later confirmed that the Qatari emir was central to the entire deal. So you have seen not just the US, its allies also reaching out to ensure that there is no escalation. And moments after this call, Trump abruptly announces the truce. He goes on the social media and he says that there is a ceasefire. In the next 6 hours, you will see a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And the buzz is that a lot of top officials, in fact, in his own administration, were blindsided by this move. They were not aware of this. They did not see this coming, and clearly not the timing. But then, Trump being Trump, because he thinks that we all live in a world that is dominated by Donald Trump, where he can continue to bluff, he still decided to do this, but there has been escalation also earlier reported in the day. Let's quickly make more sense of what is going on and can the ceasefire really hold? I want to say good evening to Daniel Silverbach, who's a Middle East expert joining us. Daniel, thank you so much for your time. As you see the entire story, as you hear Donald Trump saying not interested in a regime change, Trump saying Iran cannot have nukes anymore, he's reprimanded Israel like never before. How do you connect all these dots?
Well, I think with President Trump, sometimes it's difficult to connect those dots, but let me give it a shot. One, I think the ceasefire announcement yesterday might have been more aspirational than practical, but nonetheless, I think it did serve a pretty significant purpose, one that many US presidents have done with the Israeli government, which is providing a pretext for Israel's leadership to militarily stop. Remember, Benjamin Netanyahu is in a tough political place. He launched a highly successful operation against Iran while he's also mired in Gaza, and his coalition is highly sensitive to the idea of when exactly he is going to stop the Iran campaign. So when Donald Trump comes out and in a somewhat unprecedented fashion chides him publicly to the extent he did, it serves a purpose of giving Netanyahu an opportunity to turn to his coalition and say, hey, I would love to continue, but the president of the United States, who just bombed Iran, he's telling me to stop, I'm going to stop. So while it was a classic Donald Trump move and somewhat unprecedented, it also serves a well-worn purpose.
Oh, yes. I think that's a very interesting take, Daniel, on everything that has happened so far. But everyone also wants to know, and so do our viewers, that where is the Iranian supreme leader? Where is he? What possibly can happen, Daniel? So that is, an update that I want to tell our viewers more about before I come back to you here in this conversation. And what could happen as far as the supreme leader is concerned, we'll get those graphics up here on our screens as you see the three key players here. And all these three key players, remember, right now hold a key to what could happen, not just in the Middle East, but then in geopolitics. Now, what next for the Supreme Leader? What is the positive? What is it that he gains? Remember, he survived a regime change heat. The same Donald Trump who said that I know where Ayatollah is, today says, regime change? No, not really. I do not want it. So does this mean that he has a new lifeline? Let's get in the next gain. As far as this entire escalation, the de-escalation is concerned, many believe that he's stronger now in the eyes of the Iranians. He's actually consolidated his position. Could this help him? Could this mean that the entire conversation about a succession plan and everything else could tank? We do not know. But he's also, remember, being now framed as the man who actually stood up to the US and Israel. Look at the entire semantics. You have Ayatollah versus the US, Ayatollah versus Israel. And today, Iran, as we saw those images, you have people on the streets celebrating because they believe that he's come out stronger. He also has proven that Iran can strike deep inside Israel. What does this mean for the Iron Dome? What does this mean for a lot of technological advances also? Has he also silenced the exiled crown prince for now, who's away, and he's been speaking of a regime change. He's been saying that Ayatollah needs to step down. But clearly you've seen that entire thing for the moment being halted by even Donald Trump saying, I am not interested in a regime change. But then there is also the negative to the entire story. What really are the costs involved? That the nuclear ambitions possibly could have taken a major hit. Remember, there are 3 facilities that the US has been able to strike, though Iran continues to claim that it has not been good enough, no damage, any casualties have also been suffered, but the reports say otherwise. And the nuclear plan was a national pride. And that possibly could be under pressure. As far as Iran is concerned, Iran also could be more isolated than ever in the region. And that clearly is not good news. But then, because we've spoken about Iran, quickly let's also get in, where does Israel today stand? Where does Benjamin Netanyahu today stand? What is it that he has gained? What is it that he might have lost? Now, this is about Netanyahu's legacy that is in the balance. Why? Because remember Hamas attack, and then Israel was caught off guard. A lot of questions were raised then on him, his leadership, and the intel. A national crisis under Netanyahu's watch. That is exactly how that attack is going to be remembered for times to come. This brings us to our next important point. What do the critics say? The critics say that October 7th is a stain. It is a stain on Netanyahu's legacy, something, again, that he hasn't been able to really take off his clamor. Brings us to the 4th point. Now you have a war with Iran that has opened a second front. There is a lot of disenchantment when it comes to Netanyahu himself domestically, and that is why the idea was to consolidate your position. Brings us to our next important point. As far as his legacy is concerned, the US support actually gave Benjamin Netanyahu a temporary boost. That US plus Israel, could it defeat Iran? Maybe no, because everyone today is saying that we have won and no one has lost. But clearly this is also a perception battle that Israel is finding difficult to defend right now. And he had long warned that Iran is Israel's true threat. But then what happened? How did we see the ceasefire? On what conditions? Brings us to our 7th important point. Is this his redemption or his final gamble? Will we see Netanyahu accepting this ceasefire, accepting this truce, or this is just, like they say, a roadblock and you will see more coming? At home, the war may actually revive his sinking political fortunes. He might be able to bolster this, to seal his fortunes. But war crime charges and global pressure, all that continues to mount. And this could be difficult for Benjamin Netanyahu to actually sustain and to travel through. Brings us to our final point, which is the 10th point that you see on your screens. Can Netanyahu rewrite his legacy, or will the war destroy this? This is very significant. When you're talking of Iran and Israel and whatever has happened between both the countries, let's go back to Daniel. As far as this entire update about both Iran and Israel is concerned, Daniel, how do you see this? Would it be fair to say that Iran has come taller and Israel for the moment is looking shaky?
I would not reach that conclusion. Let's talk about Iran first. No question that Iranian state media is putting out all kinds of videos celebrating their great achievement. It looks remarkably similar to what the Egyptian government put out in 1967, days after Israel had obliterated their air force. You can't trust Iranian state media. Of course, they're going to present a highly confident face. The reality is far more devastating for Iran's armed forces. Israel penetrated every level of Iran's military and intelligence apparatus. There were even video calls that were recorded and released of Israel calling Iranian generals and warning them to get out of their house. They knew where they lived. They knew exactly who they were, what they did. No one can walk away from that saying that this was a win for Iran. But how the Iranian government presents it, that's an entirely different story. But I don't think that Iran's government is coming out of this stronger. I do think that the regime has staying power. And this has been the theme for the last 50 years of the revolution, that when it seems weakest, it is able to strengthen its position through domestic oppression. And no question, it's taken a significant hit here, but I am not expecting an immediate regime shift. And I'm certainly not thinking someone from the outside, like the son of the Shah, is going to play a role. Now let's switch to the Israeli side. I actually think Israel and Netanyahu specifically are coming out stronger from this. For the Israelis, this was an unmitigated success. They are in a very different position than they were 13 days ago, when Iran had its nuclear facilities, had a capability to reconstitute its ballistic missile capabilities, its air defense capabilities. Those are all obliterated. And so Israel is coming out more confident, notwithstanding the devastation that it suffered at the hands of Iranian ballistic missiles. And Netanyahu personally is coming out stronger from this. Now, remember, this might just be a temporary high. He still has to deal with the Gaza conflict. Yes. That is a domestic challenge. It is a global challenge, as you pointed out. It's a human challenge. What's happening on the ground in Gaza is devastating. But politically, no question, he is stronger at the moment to be able to deal with that challenge.
Okay, and Daniel, because you spoke about what happened in 67 versus 2025, I think that's a fascinating insight to get our viewers more details of. And with your permission, I want to actually look at this entire comparison. Remember 1967 versus 2025. One is a war that Israel won, and the other is about the war that it survived. We are talking of the war that we have just seen, for the moment, halting today. Now, in 1967, Israel crushes 3 Arab nations in just 6 days. They crushed 3 nations in 6 days. In 2025, it takes them 12 days just to survive Iran. Back then, you had Israel redrawing the entire map. And now, it is redrawing the myth of invincibility. Now, in 1967, look at the highlights. There was a blitzkrieg. These are images on the left of your screens. In the window there, you had preemptive strikes that Israel had launched. And Egypt, Jordan, Syria, every of this location was flattened. Gaza, the West Bank, Sinai and Golan were captured. Israel also triples its territory, and also it is known that it doubled its power exactly by that same proportion. Now, if you look at what happened in 2025, those are images playing out to the extreme right. This is where Iran survives the US stealth strikes. It fires back at a US base. It also hits Israel till the ceasefire buzzer. Iron Dome, reports say, did leak. It did suffer reverses. So this wasn't a blaze. It was a bleed for everyone. In 67, you had Israel that stunned the Arab world. In 2025, it has possibly stunned itself. There is no swagger, perhaps less of it. There is no Moshe Dan moment. There are just bunkers, there are briefings, and maybe broken myths. Globally, how has the situation panned out? 1967 brought awe. People were struck at the capabilities of Israel. But 2025 has brought a lot of outrage. Like you just heard Daniel also speaking about what happened in Gaza. So who really won? This is a question people ask at the end of every war or a conflict. Who's won? Who's lost? But at the moment, we can't tell you who's really won, but something has been lost. This is the illusion of a control, illusion of a power. Israel, for the moment, remember, the same Israel that looked untouchable then, and America that looked unbeatable then, and an Iran that looked crushable then. In 2025, all these three things that I've just spoken about are different. That myth is shattered. 1967 was about building a legacy. 2025 may have fractured it. This wasn't just a war, it was a reckoning. It is just one of those pauses. What happens next is something that everyone is interested in looking at, and I want to go back to Daniel exactly on this point. Daniel, we've seen what happened in 67 versus 2025. Now, do you believe again that this is the end of everything? What is it that the US gains out of this? What is it that Israel gains out of this? And what is it that Iran gains out of this?
Well, I would ever so humbly disagree with the characterization that 2025 broke the Israeli image of invincibility, unlike 67. I would say quite the contrary. After the failures of October 7th, what we just saw over the last 13 days actually reconstituted Israel's perception of invincibility. What Israel accomplished militarily was unprecedented. And no question that this strike, this preemptive war, was probably the most consequential in Israel's history. And make no mistake, similar to 67, this was a preemptive strike on Israel's part. And remember, they achieved total dominance over Iran's airspace. They won the intelligence space, the cyberspace. They knew where Iran's military, nuclear intelligence facilities were. They hit them hard and never suffered a single casualty. So, as a military analyst, I would argue that Israel very much had the upper hand here and demonstrated extraordinary capabilities. If you want to talk about Israel's vulnerability, then I think you look at what happened on October 7th, and you look at previous engagements in Lebanon, for example, where Israel went in thinking, well, they could mop this up pretty quickly, and they got stuck in a quagmire. That was certainly not the case here. Now, what happens moving forward with, I think, Israel's victory and Iran's weakness? I'd like to think, I'll tell you what I'd like to happen is that President Trump, however one thinks about these strikes, might have created an opening for diplomacy. We just saw this morning President Trump do something which a lot of people did not have on their bingo card and is very important actually for India. He publicly stated that China would be allowed to continue to buy Iranian oil. Now remember, the main way that Iran, that its authoritarian regime has survived since the reimposition of sanctions in 2018 has been Chinese purchase of oil. The US has tried to sanction that 10 different ways. It has failed to do so. President Trump just legalized it. Why?
Why exactly?
I think that I think he was doing it because this is victor's justice of sorts. This is a way of extending an olive branch to Iran, saying the US and Israel just accomplished its mutual objectives of ensuring Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon. Let's get back to the negotiating table. Let's figure out how we can reach a diplomatic solution to permanently ensure Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. And that's something that the entire world community had supported. Remember, China and Russia were at the table in 2015 negotiating the JCPOA, the Iran agreement. So I actually think that this could be a positive moment for diplomacy, but it's going to require some discipline on the part of the Trump administration.
Oh, yes. And Daniel, Trump being Trump, you never know what's coming next. And that's a very interesting point that you have just spoken about next. I mean, is this about a lot of things? The global axis changing. You have Donald Trump speaking for Iran, rebuking Israel, whatever that means. But only for one of time, I'm thanking you. But the promise is that we will continue to keep our viewers on top of that story. But I want to take a cue from what you've just heard from Daniel as far as the nukes are concerned. Now, could we be looking at a situation where the Iran says, oh, listen, we are giving up our nuke program. that isn't happening. But then what is the deal? What is the deal that Trump has been able to strike with Iran? What is it that Israel gets? Even as you look at all this, on your screens are more details of the IAEA, that is the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Iran, because there is a fallout. There could be a serious threat to the nukes, how you see Iran dealing with this, vis-a-vis what has happened in the last few hours. Because we just told you how the Iranian Nuclear Agency has said that we will continue with our program. But they've also said that they will not, for the moment, buckle under any kind of pressure. And they don't want any kind of surveillance by the IAEA. So if Iran quits the NPT, remember the global proliferation nightmare could begin. You could also see a situation where their parliament has said that we want nothing to do with the IAEA, the worst case scenario. And think of this, that what if these nukes actually fall in the hand of the Houthis, the Hezbollah, the proxies of Iran? Who will take responsibility? Will Donald Trump take a responsibility? Will he ensure that that does not happen? Will he ensure that Iran toes the line? These are critical questions that no one still has an answer to, and that is why it's important to keep watching what happens on the story. All these three players, whether it is Donald Trump, whether it is Netanyahu, whether it is Ayatollah, they hold the key to what possibly could happen. But I also want to, before we wrap things in this edition of the news, get you something interesting and important. Remember, while most of the talk has actually centered around the US's B-2 bombers and also Tomahawks, what has remained under radar is US's vast arsenal of weapons. These weapons that include jamming jets, anti-radiation weapons, and our colleague Shivarur is actually talking about 5 such weapons that possibly could be a defining moment in global warfare.
In Operation Midnight Hammer, everyone has told you about the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that led the bombing of those nuclear facilities in Iran. But I'm going to tell you about 5 weapons that were used or deployed that night that no one has reported about in detail so far. The first one of them is called the AGM-88E, Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile. The role this played was preemptive suppression of Iranian air defenses. These missiles were fired that night ahead of the stealth bombers at Iranian air defenses during the B-2 pack entry into Iranian airspace, fired by US fighter aircraft flying in support of the stealth bombers to ensure safety from ground engagement. This mission has been confirmed by US Secretary of Defense, but the weapon was not named. Number 2, the ADM-160, which is a miniature air-launched decoy jammer. The role this played, and we can confirm it was used, decoys fired by US fighter aircraft to mimic fighter radar signatures and basically fool Iranian air defenses and radars, saturate them alongside jamming of ground sensors in Iran. The third weapon that we know was deployed in the air, we don't know if it was used, is the AGM-158B JASSM-ER. The role of this stealth cruise missile was kept as a backup weapon. F-35 fighters, F-22 fighters armed with these but did not need to fire them, we hear, since the main weapons were fired, obviously, very, very successfully, but those were definitely in the air. This is the AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon, or JSOW. The role was, it was a standby glide bomb, possibly to destroy Iranian airbase infrastructure in case fighter jets were scrambled that night. They were not obviously fired since the B-2s did not trigger any Iranian aircraft scramble, and no weapon was fired at the B-2s. Nobody even knew that they were there. And finally, the enigmatic EA-18 Growler. This is an electronic attack aircraft which was in the air producing continuous jamming along the B-2 stealth bomber flight route, sanitizing air corridors outside Iran, jamming possible or expected airborne intercept radars borne by Iranian fighter aircraft that were expected to scramble and cripple Iranian command and control. Again, these were there as a safety, but they were deemed not necessary at all, obviously, because the Spirit and its entire package went completely undetected.
And with this, it's a wrap on this edition of the show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.